So now what we're going to do is set up our URLs for our detail views. Now, if we look in the admin, this will actually help clarify what I mean by that. In the admin, this is kind of like a dashboard, right? So we can actually click on any given model and we see a list view come back. We've already done the list view part of things, right? So now what we need to do is that one extra step, which is actually clicking on one of these things and seeing what's coming out in there. Now, of course, when it comes to like TV shows, we should see the actual seasons as well, right? And those would also have their own detail views. So that means that in our URLs, we need to start adjusting for this. So our path of movies, we also want to have another path for our detail. So this is eventually going to be a movie detail view, but we'll leave it in as a list view for now. But the idea is, how exactly are we going to look for this? Well, we can model based off of the admin itself and look in the URL whenever we click on one of these detail items. We can see that it says 14/change. What that is just the ID of that object, right? So if I came in here, I would use these brackets here and say int :ID. So what this is going to do is verify that what's being passed in here is a number, and then that number is going to be associated to the variable ID. So if I called this my ID, it would be associated to that variable, which we'll see once we actually go in and build the detail views. But the reason I'm doing all of the URLs right now is to really just think about the structure of them before I actually implement the detail views. So we can take a look at this, making sure our server is running. If I go into movies and then /ABC and hit enter, I get not found. If I do movies 1, I still get not found. Now, notice that I have a trailing slash here. So inside of your URLs, it is a good idea to have those trailing slashes. And again, if I do ABC, it's still not working, including with that trailing slash. So if I actually change this to being a slug, then I can actually come in here and now ABC will work, and so will a number, right? Because slugs can be either one, but slug is the data type. So the documentation does go over this quite in there. I'll just go ahead and reference what the different data types are. First, str, this is just anything but a slash. So everything but slash. And int is just any number, 0 and up. Okay. The slug is a slug field. So this is a slug, right? And then we also have a UUID field and a path field. So UUID, if you import UUID into Python and do UUID 4, you'll see what that looks like. So just import UUID and then run UUID 4. And then the path will be literally ABC, ABC, or whatever that is going to match the path. Now this all correlates to, one of these arguments here. So int, and then your variable, so my var. Okay, so that's the reference that we want to go off of in general. So this also makes me think, how should I go about designing my URLs? Now, first and foremost, I actually want to go off of the slugs, but if I had so much content like Netflix does, they probably don't use slugs at all. They probably use IDs or UUIDs. The reason being that they would use an ID or a UUID is the speed as to which that can be looked up, right? So databases do really well with indexing integers. That's why by default, this has an integer for the ID, right? So in the model itself, every single model has an ID field and it's automatically generated, as we've already seen and discussed. So that's often the best way to have detail views for lots and lots of content. It's just going to be a lot faster to look up something that way. But in my case, I'm actually not going to have that much content. I mean, tens of thousands of items of content is not that much content. So we go in here and say slug, and then I'm going to go ahead and pass that in as the field name that I want to use, which is going to be slug field. So this actually works great for movies, right? And then the next one being shows. Well, shows is going to have two different views that we want to see. first off is still going to be that slug and slug. Now, this actually might have all the seasons built into it, right? So we might actually display all the seasons right here, or we might have two ways to see the seasons. That is an actual path to seasons or one without it. Okay? So then that also means that I'm going to come up here and do one more thing and add a season slug. So this is still going to be slug, and we'll call this season slug. And we could use underscores or dashes here. In this case, I like using camel cases for the URLs just to separate them out just a little bit. And this one, I'm going to call it show slug. Again, to designate between these two things because of the detail view that will eventually be there. Okay, so the next question is, should we have more than just this? Well, yeah, we probably should. We probably should have one for our playlists. So playlists. And in this case, I'm now going to use ID of ID. Now, or rather, integer of ID. Okay, so the variable name will be integer. And then this would be our feature playlist view. This is a detail view for that. But this would also potentially capture or allow me to see any of my items. So instead of calling this playlist, maybe I would just say P or media. And then that way I have just more of a general catch-all type URL as a detail view for any of these items. Now, we're going to actually implement all of these to ensure that they actually work correctly. But hopefully now you have a better idea of how to actually go about using the newer version of URL routing. Now, there is one more version that you'll probably be interested in knowing about, and this was the standard before, and it's called REPath. Older versions of Django call this URLs, or really URL like that. So REPath is a regular expression path. So if you're not familiar with regular expressions, well, then it's going to be a little confusing. But let's go ahead and just say, an arbitrary view here. I'm actually not going to end up using or implementing this, but I just wanted to mention it. So if I went to my detail slash, now in this, I can actually use a regular expression, something like this, and that would actually give me a very similar result as far as what's going into this path as this right here, right? So whether or not there is a trailing slash there, I will actually append all of those trailing slashes, but these are almost identical on how they actually function. But as you see, this one's just so clean to write. Knowing regular expressions is good, and I do recommend it, but it often adds some complexity where you don't necessarily need it. Thus, the new version of URL paths has come out. But if you have some really robust regular expressions you need in here, which in some projects they will, sometimes you'll need to have a date and the ID and several other features for the actual URL path that you want to actually break apart. Okay, so with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get rid of that. I don't need it, but it was worth talking about. So now it's actually time to implement all of the detail views that would actually render this stuff out.